Hi, I'm Warren Saunders, President of Global Sales for GfK. GfK have been providing consumer insights on a global basis for over 80 years, and our combination of point of sale data, customer behavioral data, and direct consumer insights puts us in a unique position to understand what consumers are thinking, what they're doing, and most importantly, where they're spending their money. Today, I'm here to talk to you about crisis as a catalyst for change. Throughout history, crisis has often brought about societal change, whether that's behavioral, whether that's ethical, or whether that's technological. The big step changes that we've seen from a society perspective have normally come out of inflection points and crisis points in history. As it relates to the sustainability movement, that's especially true. But this time, things are different. This time, what we're seeing is that sustainability, rather than a reaction to a moment in time, is simply the crisis is accelerating an existing behavioral shift. What we have already in place is an energized movement. And what I mean by that is that for the last 10 years at least, we've seen a significant increase in the number of consumers buying A triple plus rated appliances and putting at the purchase agenda sustainability, eco-friendliness, particularly relates to consumer appliances and cars and other energy-heavy devices. So we already have a movement in place. What we also have, which makes things a little bit more complicated, is a bit of a crisis of consumer trust. So consumers are super excited and super energized by the need for a more eco-friendly device, but they're suspicious of the messaging coming out of the industry, whether that's marketing messaging or whether that's press or whether it's the way that manufacturers are using social media. There is a suspicion that big business is not on this journey with them. So while consumers are increasingly considering sustainable purchases, there is a challenge here for manufacturers. Recent developments, such as the EU launching its new energy labels, which came into place just a few weeks ago, are critical tools for consumers who are looking to navigate the marketplace and get a better picture of what's going on. To make things even more complicated, we have Generation Z. All of you will have been aware of the Extinction Rebellion of Greta Thunberg and the huge rise of thinking and feelings that have come out of the younger generation. These guys are redefining what sustainability is and what it means to be an environmentalist. The traditional views of an environmentalist have gone by the wayside, and today's open-minded and tech-savvy youth are leading a strong voice to the environmental movement and expanding sustainability beyond standard economical and ecological concerns. So what we have today is a perfect storm, a crisis which is bringing about a societal and behavioral shift, and an existing movement, plus combine that with a suspicion of the messages coming out of big business, and we are at an inflection point for the MDA industry and for purchasing and consumer behavior in general. So let's look a little bit more carefully at some of those historical moments and see what we can learn from them, what's changed and what's the same. The modern environmental movement dates back to World War II and accelerated in the 1960s and 1970s. In World War II, it was very much a reaction to a resource crunch, and whether that was, as you can see here, encouraging recycling from bones, which were needed for making glue and fertilizer, or whether it was raw materials that were needed for munitions, there was a huge drive government sponsored towards sustainability, something that consumers and the public at large bought into massively. But when that crisis receded post World War II, behaviors returned much to normal, until we can see a further inflection point in the early 1970s, where we had the energy crisis. And that brought about the need for smaller and more fuel efficient cars. But here again, this was a reaction as much as it was a trend of behavior. And as well as the ecological advantages that this brought, consumers were as concerned, if not more concerned, with the commercial and financial benefits that came out of this as well. And indeed, if we look towards the recession at the end of the 2000s, this is exacerbated still further. So while we see a green message, that you can see in this particular still going green can save you, that green message again is tied very much towards a financial incentive as much as an ecological one. This time, as I say, things are different. This time, what we have is that sustainability is now a core personal crisis, personal core value. Sorry. Here is our proof that COVID is just a catalyst here. This is not the reaction to. This is a core crisis. What we do here at GfK is we have 57 statements that we put to the public on a global basis and ask them to rank them in order of importance. Preserving the environment, as you can see in 2016, increased in importance from 27 to 25. But over the past 5 years, it has continued to accelerate significantly to the point where now it is the 16th most important, up 11 ranks from 2016. So what we're seeing is that at worst, the notion of consumer-driven sustainability is proven resilient in the face of a pandemic. At best, consumers are telling us that it's more important than ever. In previous crises, sustainability was often a byproduct of conserving resources, for example, saving money. In 2021, sustainability has become less a secondary or tertiary driver and a more primary driver for consumer behavior. Interestingly, what we've seen historically is that while you might think that looking at something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these kind of environmental concerns would disappear or recede significantly during periods of recession, what we've actually seen in Germany and other key forward-thinking markets is that what tends to happen is they sustain. So they don't drop away, but they tend to stay at the same level as other things take precedence. What we've seen in this particular crisis is an acceleration of, and this has brought about significant societal change. One of the reasons that may be is that this crisis is different. This crisis has forced people to stay within their own environment and actually look to nature as one of the key hobbies or pastimes that they can still do or still partake in during a lockdown. And what we've seen from a GfK perspective is that gardening tools, for example, and the purchase of such items grew significantly in 2020 versus 2019, along with all the other categories that have grown as a result of home working. This increase in the need for DIY and the need to take care of the home environment is a significant shift that has come as a result of this crisis. What we're also seeing as byproducts of a lack of pollution and a lack of travel, etc., and a lack of exhaust fumes, is that there are significant environmental impacts of lockdown too. The Himalayas could be seen for the first time in years in India as the lockdown eased air pollution, and similar natural phenomena were seen in other countries, particularly in China and Japan. So what you can see is that cynicism about the environment is declining and support is rising amid a global pandemic. One of the other things we look at very closely here at GfK is what we call our green gauge. And this is a global classification of consumers in 5 separate areas as we look at their attitude towards the environment and how it impacts their behaviors. In the bottom category, you might say, we have our jaded consumers. These are people who are much more interested in convenience than they are in the environment, and they will make purchase decisions based primarily on cost or convenience and less so on the ecological or wider impact of the device that they're buying. As you can see, both globally and in the UK, the number of people who fit within this category has dropped significantly in the last decade. At the top level, we have what we call our green indeed consumers. And these are people who don't just believe in it, they act on it. These are people whose purchase behavior is driven significantly by the set of beliefs that they have around the environment and how important that it is to them. And what we're seeing is a global change of +4 points in the last 10 years and +5 points in the UK. Again, this shift over the 10-year period is a significant one and one that we didn't see in previous crises. And as such, this continued increase and continued importance, coupled with some of the other factors that we've already spoken about and we'll go into a bit more detail on, shows that this is a different crisis, a different reaction, and something that we need to behave very, very differently towards our consumers in terms of messaging, in terms of marketing, and in terms of product development. Let's look at what's important for the consumers today. Conservation of energy remains a top behavior. And in 2020, what we saw was that conserving energy at home was incredibly important to 72% of consumers. More consumers were recycling, more consumers were conserving water at home, and more consumers were considering environmental protection when they were making their purchases. And that reflects in what we're seeing in terms of the AAA, A triple plus performance products, which is rising across all markets in Europe. The A triple plus is what is a European rating for major domestic appliances, which is based on the performance of a particular device, whether that's dishwashers, refrigerators, and washing machines. And what we're seeing is that consumers are placing energy efficiency as the most important feature when they're selecting these appliances. What we're also seeing, if I go back to the green gauge chart that I mentioned a couple of slides ago, is that it is absolutely the case that those consumers who believe passionately about this are translating that behavior into action. And as you can see, in the UK and Western Europe, those people who were sit in our green indeed category were significantly more to have bought an appliance which has an energy rating such as A double plus or A triple plus, 50% in the UK and 51% across Western Europe. So what we're seeing is that this is the most important feature for consumers when they're selecting their final appliance. The number two features are things like wash programs or frost-free for cooling, but the environment is critical and is the most important and is leading purchase decisions across the world. However, this comes at a time, as I talked about earlier, when consumer trust is at an all-time low, and consumers are particularly cynical of the messaging which is coming out of product manufacturers. They far less likely to believe the marketing messages, far more likely to believe that the advertising is shows companies in a particularly positive light is perhaps skewed or inaccurate or not necessarily trustworthy. As many have said in the past, we live in a bit of a post-truth world, and that's true as well from a marketeer perspective. And this will become particularly important as we come on in a minute to talk about Gen Z consumers, where this is a particular topic of importance. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, what we are seeing now is new labeling. This new labeling that's coming into place, and has just come into place actually from the 1st of March, will give customers much more information. And the fact that it is independent and government sponsored will also help in terms of credibility and in terms of helping consumers to understand what's actually happening here. As you can see, I'll show you an example. On the left is the current label, and on the right is the 2021 label. Not only is it clearer, not only does it have a great deal more information on it, but it also has a QR code in the top right so that consumers can scan that and get more information about the product and understand what's happening with the device itself. This has positives, but it also has negatives. And one watch out we should see here is that while this rating is incredibly important, what it also allows customers to do is to buy larger products because the overall energy efficiency allows them to have fit more in their washing machine, fit more in their fridges, or fit more in their ovens. So actually, the real true benefit for the environment is somewhat limited. So let's finish the presentation by talking about Generation Z, because this is absolutely critical and an important part of any consumer messaging that we're putting out as marketeers and as product manufacturers. These guys are mobilizing for the climate crisis. They have a very, very sophisticated grasp of digital communication, and that gives them an advantage and allows them to globalize much more readily than previous have been able to do so. They have resources at their place, such as technology and social media, and they are using them significantly to their advantage to get their message out there. In 2019, they led a record number of strikes for the environment and urged their governments to slash greenhouse gases. And in 2020, they lead all generations on sustainability as a personal value. Let's look at that here in a bit more detail. What we can see is that the Generation Z are greener than millennials were at the same age, where millennials 10 years ago, 30% of them saw the environment and took the environment into consideration in purchase decision. Now that number is 49%. As you can see, as I talked earlier about this ranking of 57 personal values, while overall we see the preserving the environment at number 16 at the moment, for Generation Z, it's already at number 10. So there's a significant shift happening here, and the way that they are interacting with each other as Generation Z and the way that they are getting their message out there and their levels of cynicism about big business are significant and have significantly changed. The other thing that's changed significantly is their purchase behavior in general. They're far less interested in brands and far more interested in wearing their environmentalism as a badge. It is really a status symbol. The purchase journey is completely different. Their interest in brands is completely different. They're much less interested in product ownership. We've all heard so much over the last few years about the experience economy. I think we also need to start thinking about the belief economy, an economy driven by morality, by beliefs, and by behavioral shifts as much as it is by previous generations who saw brands as a badge of honor and as a status symbol. That is no longer the case. What we're seeing is a Generation Z who are tech and social media savvy and allied with the access to and an interest in circular economies. Ownership much less interesting to them. They're much more interested in renting products, in leasing products, or in sharing products to minimize the waste. And they're much more broadly interested in other social issues such as gender equality and diversity. So what does that mean as we move forward? What is the summary here? Well, first of all, we need to think global. It's incredibly important that marketing messages and commitment to change from a corporate level are led and followed through globally. Because the movement from environmental and sustainability is a global movement, it's incredibly easy to get tripped up if just one country or one market or one product area doesn't get the messaging right. That can cause global challenges for you if you just get it wrong in one particular place. It's really, really important that you are thinking globally about the way that you interact with your consumers and the messaging is consistent at all levels. We also need to be bold. This is not a time for sitting back. What we've seen throughout history is that those people who lead through a crisis and those organizations that lead through a crisis are the ones that come out of that crisis the strongest. So be bold about your attitude towards climate change and the statements that you make and the actions that you take. Make sure that they are significant because you will come through this crisis stronger. But as I talk about being bold in terms of the statements that you make, be really, really mindful that those statements that you make can be backed up because building trust is going to be critical. It's no use making the big empty statement because you will be found out. And making the big empty statement will cause you far, far more harm than good in this particular crisis and with this particular audience. And when I talk about this particular audience, I mean see Generation Z. See how these guys are interacting with each other. See how they are getting their message out there. See the passion. See the way that they are taking this movement forward and owning it. It's incredibly important that we speak their language and that we're listening as well as speaking. It's no longer good enough for us to just put statements out there. We need to be a part of the conversation and a part of the solution rather than just offering our own answers. So I hope that's given you something to think about as we move forward. I think as we look at the next steps, you've got to be ready, be set up, think about what comes next, and make the appropriate decisions in a mindful and truthful way. I'd like to thank you for your time. On the screen now, you'll see some contact data. If there's more that we can help you with or more that we can tell you about, please get in touch. Thanks again for taking the time to watch this presentation. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.